From collisions in streets, we have some avoidance collisions in space too with stars, and we have star clusters that isolate, and it's interesting. So massive star clusters are a point of study from a couple University of Michigan recently, and they reveal how massive stars, which are like stars that are 8 times greater than the massive hours, become isolated, and their star clusters kick them out somehow. So instead of like being in with all these little guys, they get kicked out. And it says usually they reside in isolated. Like, so massive stars, they reside in clusters, but there's isolated massive stars that they call field massive stars. Most of these stars are in the small Magellanic Cloud, which is a dwarf galaxy near the Milky Way. So they're trying to understand how galaxies evolve. So this is the reason why they started studying it. But part of the isolation of these massive stars are being ejected from the star cluster. So that was the question, and like, how do these massive stars just get like ejected from these like clusters? So there's 2 methods that they found through studies. They used it in the database. They found like these massive stars, and they use these databases using like algorithms. They used like friends of friends and tip of the iceberg to find these runaway stars, and they could trace the supernova ejection to how they were actually ejected from them. So there's 2 methods, and so before they're remedied, before like being reaccelerated, they're either dynamically ejected or binary supernova ejected. So a dynamical ejection is when they're ejected from the cluster. It's they get shot out by 500,000 miles per hour because of unstable orbital configurations of the stellar group. So maybe it's just like the gravitational thing, they like get flung out somehow, and they just like keep going. And then the second way, the binary supernova, is maybe it's so when it's in a binary pair, they're spinning and onto each other. So one star explodes and shoots the companion out into space. And they figured this out by having the velocities and the masses of the stars. They can compare the distributions and determine which mechanic ejected them. Yeah, it's interesting because there's 2 that like they find these massive the tip of the iceberg clusters, or where the massive target is like, it says the relative isolation in tiny clusters of smallers is where the massive target is called the tip of the iceberg cluster, and the other is they use the nearest neighbors. So the friends of the friends algorithm measures the number density of stars, counting how many stars are in a specific distance. So with the number of density between the target star and the nearest 20 companions. The more compact and denser the group, the more likely there to be clusters. So, I don't know. It seems like instead of being in these massive clusters, these massive stars are in maybe a smaller star cluster, but the density is they're closer to each other, and they are, some of them are also in clusters where there are more massive stars. So it's not like you're gonna have a massive star and a bunch of small ones. It seems like they kind of gravitate to each other. And it says she found that only a few of the field massive stars appear to have the tip of the iceberg clusters, which means like that there seems like only few of them are like the biggest ones out of it, suggesting that the very few actually formed in the field. So the balance of the field stars must have originated as runaways. So it says, in the end, we showed that 5% or less of the stars had tip of the iceberg clusters. Instead, our findings imply that the majority of stars in field studies could be runaways. Our findings are actually supporting the result that Johnny found wrapped in a neat little bow. And Johnny and Irene's work are flip sides of the same coin. Irene's numbers are consistent with Johnny's, in that the vast majority of field massive stars are runaways, but that a few are not. This is a critical finding for understanding how massive stars and clusters form and in what conditions. So yeah, this is a big update to figuring out what helps massive stars forming and where they how they get formed, and I guess I just said that. But anyways, yeah, instead of black holes, we have, yeah.
One question I had was about the binary stars. Is it like...
Yeah, so...
Did you even talk about that?
Mm-hmm.
Do like the two stars like revolve around each other or do something weird, and then somehow it's the one maybe like gets too big or something, and like,
yeah,
I don't know.
So
how
sometimes, so usually in the binary star system, there's one that's going to be older, a bigger star. So usually that star would like supernova, maybe like implode in itself, and then in reaction to that, the second star might get flung off into space somewhere.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's one of the different mechanics they found is used to produce a runaway.
That's interesting. I would expect that's more rare.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think that's what they found also. I don't think binary stars are as common as just having it get ejected as a massive star from the cluster. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and forgot to mention this. It says about a quarter of all massive stars appear to be isolated.
About a quarter of the supermassive stars are all isolated?
Or isolated, yeah.
That's interesting.
Yep.
So they'd be kind of like, would they be kind of outside of a galaxy? Or kind of just floating out on its own? Or revolving somehow around a black hole or something?
Or instead of being like in these massive clusters of stars with a lot of like smaller stars, they would be by itself or have like a small group of stars alongside them. So it's it's more like it's not like floating around in outer space by itself. It's just like more isolated. It's probably, I don't know. Feel like, yeah. It's like having a house in the middle of nowhere. Like you're not just,
Oh,
yeah. It's like you have a smaller neighborhood, but maybe you have a bunch of big houses around you or something.
that's interesting.
Yeah. So that's my topic instead of black holes.